Welcome to the Deep Dive, tailored just for you. Today, we're tackling a foundational, but honestly often terrifying concept in common law contracts. When you try to accept an offer, how can just, a single word or maybe a small request accidentally blow up the entire deal? We're diving deep into the high stakes of conditional acceptance.
Yeah, it's that tension every negotiator faces, where you want to lock down the agreement, but maybe you also want to tweak the terms just a little bit. Under common law, especially for things like real estate or services, the rule for acceptance is unforgivingly strict, let's put it that way. Our mission today is really to understand the difference between a clean, binding acceptance and what's actually a rejection disguised as a counteroffer. And we'll use that landmark case that cost a buyer a whole property over some furniture, Ardente v. Haran.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a really, really expensive lesson in grammar, doesn't it? Before we get to Mr. Ardente's misfortune, let's maybe set up the analytical framework. We need to know what purity even means in contract formation. And, is there any room at all for just asking a simple question?
Absolutely, yeah. We need a clear path. We need to diagnose these scenarios in, let's say, 3 steps. First, we establish the basic rule for how pure an acceptance needs to be, pure and simple. Second, we look at the narrow but really critical exception for what are called mere inquiries, the kind that don't spoil the contract. And third, we apply those rules directly to the Ardente case to see exactly where that line is drawn in the sand.
Okay, so why is common law so, paranoid about accepting an offer?
Yeah.
What is the foundational requirement for my response to be a valid acceptance? And what happens if I try to tweak it, even just a tiny bit?
The foundational idea is pretty straightforward conceptually. The answer has to be yes, full stop, period. This is governed by the famous mirror image rule. Heard of that?
Right.
Your acceptance must be definite and unequivocal. It has to perfectly mirror the terms laid out in the offer. If you reply with any deviation, any condition, or any kind of limitation on that offer, well, you haven't actually accepted it. Instead, you've rejected the original offer. Gone. Poof. And what you've done is create a counteroffer, which then puts the ball back in the original offeror's court. They have to decide if they want to accept your new terms.
Huh. That sounds incredibly rigid. I mean, if the stakes are losing a house, it just seems unfair that one minor request could instantly kill what seems like a good deal.
Yeah.
Is there any wiggle room for just, basic human communication, like asking a quick question about something without voiding the whole acceptance?
There is, thankfully. There's a crucial exception that legal scholars, people like Williston and Corbin, recognized. It allows for standard negotiation back and forth. And acceptance can be valid even if there's some conditional language, if the acceptance itself is clearly independent of that condition. The key is really what you're signaling. Are you saying, I'll only agree if I get this extra thing? Or are you saying, okay, we have a deal. Now, separately, could you maybe do this other thing for me?
Okay. So if I say, I accept, but only if, that kills it. But if I frame it like, I accept, we have a deal, and, hey, by the way, that might save it.
Exactly. That's the core distinction. As the big commentators on contract law pointed out, as long as it's crystal clear that the meaning is positively and unequivocally to accept the offer, whether such request is granted or not, then a contract is formed. But the moment you make the contract itself hinge on that request being granted, you've crossed the line. You failed the test.
Okay, now let's test this unforgiving rule. Let's bring in the real-world high stakes of Ardente v. Haran. This involves selling a specific house in Newport, Rhode Island. We're back in the 70s. What were the basic facts leading up to this whole dispute?
Right. So the defendants, the Harans, they were selling their house. The plaintiff, Mr. Ardente, put in a bid for $250,000. The Harans accepted that bid. So far, so good. Ardente then moves forward, signs the formal purchase and sale agreement, sends it back with a pretty hefty deposit check, $20,000. But, and this is the crucial part, along with that signed agreement and check, he included a separate letter dated September 8, 1975, and it was because of what was in that single letter that the Horans backed out and refused to go through with the sale.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at it not just as lawyers, but maybe as homebuyers too. How did one letter cost this man everything? Let's analyze Ardente v. Haran. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, the key facts are these. Ardente delivered the signed contract, the deposit check, and this letter about personal property. The letter said in part that his clients were concerned about specific items, things like the dining room set, a tapestry wall covering, fireplace fixtures, some parlor furniture staying with the house. And crucially, the letter added, I would appreciate your confirming that these items are a part of the transaction as they would be difficult to replace. The Horans refused to include those items and then rejected the entire deal.
Okay. And what was the core legal issue here?
The absolute central issue was whether the language in that accompanying letter was a valid, clear-cut acceptance of the offer to sell the house, or did it impose a new condition or limitation that legally turned it into a counteroffer, which of course would mean it rejected the Horan's original offer.
So what rule did the court apply to figure this out?
The Supreme Court of Rhode Island went straight to the core common law rule. Acceptance must be definite and unequivocal. Mirror image. They looked at the established doctrine that says any condition or limitation added by the offeree acts as a counteroffer. So their entire analysis then boiled down to this. Did Ardente's specific language fall into that narrow exception for just a mere request, or was it truly conditional?
Right. So what was the court's analysis? How did they interpret that letter?
They really zoomed in on the specific words Ardente chose, and they flagged two things that basically sealed his fate. First, he asked for confirmation that the items are a part of the transaction. See how that language explicitly folds the furniture into the actual requirements of the sale itself?
Yeah, not just asking nicely.
Exactly. It wasn't phrased like a simple favor request. Second, the letter stressed the difficulty of replacing these items. The court saw that as showing Ardente considered these items pretty essential, indicating his acceptance was actually contingent on getting them. So the court found this language just wasn't consistent with an absolute unconditional acceptance followed by a separate, maybe hopeful, request. They interpreted the letter as imposing a condition on the acceptance itself.
And the conclusion. What was the final judgment?
Because the plaintiff's letter, his supposed acceptance was deemed conditional, it didn't perfectly mirror the offer. Therefore, legally, it operated as a rejection of the Horan's offer. The court affirmed the judgment for the Horan's. Bottom line, no binding contract was ever formed. Ardente lost the $250,000 house because he tried to negotiate for the dining room set at the exact moment he should have just been saying, unequivocally, I accept.
Wow. The consequences are just extreme. And the distinction is so fine, it's actually terrifying. Let's maybe use two unforgettable, really visceral scenarios or hypotheticals to try and drill down on this difference. You know, the difference between that conditional acceptance that kills the contract and the mere inquiry that saves it.
Good idea. That can help make this mirror image rule feel a bit more tangible, less abstract.
Okay, scenario one. Let's say you offer to sell me a vintage comic book for $1,000. Nice and simple. I reply, okay, I accept your $1,000 offer, provided that you first shave off your entire mustache and mail it to me in a small glass vial.
Legally, what happens now?
Right. Well, that is a spectacular failure of the mirror image rule. And yeah, a classic counteroffer. A very weird one, but definitely a counteroffer. You've clearly made your acceptance contingent upon an additional, completely non-negotiated, and frankly, pretty unsettling term, the mustache vial.
By putting in that provided that contingency, you have flat out rejected the original $1,000 offer. That offer. It's dead. Gone. No contract for the comic book exists. And the original offer is now completely free to, well, probably run away with their mustache intact. Or, theoretically, they could accept your bizarre new counteroffer, but they don't have to.
Okay, got it. Contrast that with scenario two. Same comic book with $1,000 offer. This time I say, I absolutely accept your $1,000 offer for the vintage comic book. The contract is done, locked in. Then I add, by the way, would you maybe consider throwing in that dusty old pencil you used to mark the price on the back? What happens here?
Okay. Now that's different. A contract is formed immediately, right when you say, I absolutely accept. The contract is binding for $1,000 for the comic book. Done deal. Your statement afterwards about the pencil, that's a mere inquiry. Crucially, you clearly signaled that your acceptance was totally independent of that side request. You said, the contract is done first. So the original offerer can say, no way, keep your hands off my pencil. But they are still legally bound by the contract to sell you the comic book for $1,000. That acceptance stands on its own because the request was clearly separate or collateral.
That sharp difference really highlights the danger, doesn't it? So for you, the learner, maybe you're facing a complex set of facts on an exam or even in real life, where the language seems to mix acceptance with some negotiation bits. What is the definitive step-by-step diagnostic checklist you should use to spot this Ardente issue?
Right, this is the critical synthesis part. We need to pull all these pieces together into an actionable tool for you. When you're evaluating an offeree's response under common law, follow this exact issue spotting guide. Step 1, check for unequivocal assent. Did the offeree actually use positive language that clearly indicates they are accepting the terms as offered, like, I accept, I agree, something like that? If the answer's no, well, it's probably a rejection or maybe just silence. If yes, then proceed to step 2. Step 2, identify any additional language. Does the response, after indicating assent, introduce any new terms, requests, limitations, or conditions? Think about the furniture in Ardente. If there's absolutely no additional language, great. The contract is likely formed right there. If there is additional language, you have to go to the final critical step, step 3. Analyze the language. Is it condition or inquiry? This is the Ardente test. You have to determine if the acceptance is actually made contingent on that new term or request. Look for keywords or phrases. Does it seek confirmation? Does it use language like provided that on the condition that? Or does it stress the importance of the new term, linking it directly to the deal, making it part of the transaction? If the acceptance depends on the new term, it's a counteroffer. No contract formed on the original terms. The original offer is rejected. However, if the acceptance is clearly stated first as absolute, unconditional, and the new term is introduced afterwards as a separate request, a suggestion, a collateral question, by the way, then the contract is valid based on the original terms. That subsequent request is just a mere inquiry, and it can be ignored or refused without affecting the underlying contract.
Okay, that was a really rigorous analysis. We've definitely seen that the unforgiving world of common law is crystal clear. If you want to be bound by a contract, you have to be incredibly precise. Asking for that dining room set cost Mr. Ardente a huge property deal simply because he didn't clearly separate his acceptance from his negotiation points.
Absolutely. The lesson really is, if you intend to accept, state that acceptance unequivocally. Make it final. First, only after the deal is legally sealed should you even think about bringing up collateral requests or suggesting changes. If you link them at the moment of acceptance, like Ardente did, you risk losing everything. It's a harsh rule.
A very harsh rule in the unforgiving world of common law. Stark indeed. But here's a critical question, something for you to consider as you continue your deep dive. If the Ardente case, dealing with that house and furniture, had been governed by the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC, which handles the sale of goods, the UCC is designed to be much more flexible, to facilitate commerce. Would that letter have resulted in a contract under the UCC, or would it still have been rejected? That's something to explore as you keep connecting these legal dots.